Robert De Niro is the face of controlled violence on screen. The quiet stare. The clenched jaw. The man who built a career on discipline, on menace, on absolute command of every muscle in his body. For decades, he has represented power. Calculated, restrained, and dangerous. But behind that control was instability. A boy raised between two artists who split before he learned how to anchor himself. A child who walked alone through the streets of Manhattan after school because home was fractured and quiet. A teenager labeled Bobby Milk for his pale skin and thin frame, trying to survive in a neighborhood that respected force. The price of glory did not come in one dramatic collapse. Came slowly. Public divorces that drained tens of millions of dollars. Lawsuits that exposed private bitterness. A global pandemic that nearly crippled his restaurant empire. And now, at 82, a body that has been punished by decades of physical transformation, weight gain, weight loss, and surgical repairs. What does it cost to spend a lifetime pretending to be indestructible? And when the cameras shut off, who absorbs the silence? Before we begin, leave a like as a tribute to a man whose life was far more fragile than his screen image ever allowed. Robert Anthony De Niro Jr. was born on August 17, 1943, in Manhattan, New York City. The world he entered was not stable, not traditional, and not quiet. His father, Robert De Niro Sr., was a painter and poet. His mother, Virginia Admiral, was also a painter. They were artists first, parents second. The apartment in Greenwich Village was small. The air smelled of oil paint and turpentine. Conversations revolved around exhibitions, critics, abstract expressionism, and money. Specifically, the lack of it. In the 1940s, most working artists in New York earned little to nothing from their work. Stability was not part of the household vocabulary. When De Niro was 2 years old, his parents separated. His father later revealed he was gay. In 1940s America, this was not a detail handled gently. It was a secret carried in silence. For young Robert, it meant absence. His father moved out. His mother raised him largely alone. Single motherhood in post-war America was not common, especially in artistic circles struggling financially. Statistics from the mid-20th century show that single-parent households were a minority, and financial insecurity rates were significantly higher for them. His mother worked consistently, taking whatever art-related jobs she could. But money was tight. Always tight. De Niro grew up in Little Italy, a neighborhood defined by rigid masculinity and territorial loyalty. He was thin, pale, soft-spoken. The nickname Bobby Milk followed him because of his complexion. In a community that valued toughness, that nickname was not affectionate. He learned early to observe rather than speak, to study posture, tone, and movement. This habit, born from social caution, would later become the foundation of his acting technique. As a child, he found temporary refuge in performance. At age 10, he appeared as the Cowardly Lion in a school production of The Wizard of Oz. The role required exaggerated physicality. For the first time, he discovered he could control how others saw him. He could replace the thin boy with a character. He dropped out of high school at 16. This was not a glamorous rebellion. It was a drift. He enrolled briefly at the High School of Music and Art, then transferred to a private institution, then left entirely. Formal education did not hold him. Instead, he entered acting classes. He studied at the Stella Adler Conservatory and later at the Lee Strasberg Institute. These were not casual workshops. They were intense environments rooted in method acting, reliving trauma, mining personal pain, dissolving the line between actor and role. Method acting is not psychologically neutral. It requires excavation. Actors are encouraged to access buried memories, shame, anger. Over time, repeated emotional exposure can blur internal boundaries. For De Niro, who already grew up in emotional instability, this training reinforced isolation as a tool. By the early 1960s, he was living minimally. Small apartments, sparse furniture, shared spaces. New York's independent film scene offered opportunity but no guarantees. Most actors at the time waited tables or drove taxis. Ironically, years later he would portray a taxi driver in the role that defined him. His early film roles were minor and largely unnoticed. In 1963, he appeared in The Wedding Party, though the film was not released until 1969. There was no immediate breakthrough. For nearly a decade, he hovered at the edges of relevance. Rejection was routine. Casting calls ended with silence. Studios favored taller, more traditionally handsome men. De Niro did not fit that mold. His face was sharp, intense, almost severe. Not conventionally leading man material. By the late 1960s, America was in upheaval. Vietnam War protests, civil rights movements, political assassinations. The film industry began shifting toward grittier realism. This shift would create space for someone like De Niro. But in those early years, he was still waiting. He shared cramped apartments. He conserved money carefully. There were no luxury cars, no security teams, no assistants. Just scripts, auditions, and constant evaluation. In 1973, he landed a role in Bang the Drum Slowly. He played a dying baseball player with intellectual limitations. The performance required vulnerability rather than aggression. He lost weight. He altered his speech patterns. He committed fully. Critics noticed. That same year, he worked with Martin Scorsese in Mean Streets. This partnership would define both men's careers. But at the time, it was simply two New York artists collaborating in a volatile industry. Mean Streets was raw, violent, personal. It mirrored the neighborhoods De Niro knew as a child. His performance as Johnny Boy was chaotic and unpredictable. Studios began to see him not as a background actor, but as a risk worth taking. Then came The Godfather Part II in 1974. He portrayed the young Vito Corleone, a role originally made iconic by Marlon Brando. Instead of imitating Brando, De Niro studied Sicilian dialect. He lived in Sicily for months. He reduced his English dialogue to almost nothing. The performance was restrained, internal. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. The boy called Bobby Milk was now an Oscar winner. But success did not erase early conditioning. Psychological research shows that formative childhood insecurity often persists despite later wealth or recognition. External validation does not automatically repair internal fractures. Through the mid-1970s, he immersed himself in increasingly demanding roles. For taxi driver, he obtained an actual taxi license and worked 12-hour shifts. He lost significant weight. He isolated himself socially. The famous line, "You talkin' to me?" was improvised in a near-empty apartment set. The role required him to embody loneliness so deeply that it blurred into paranoia. He slept irregularly. He stayed in character for extended periods. The physical toll was visible. Weight fluctuations, insomnia, tension in posture. Actors who undergo extreme body changes face long-term metabolic consequences. Rapid weight gain and loss can stress the cardiovascular system. Hormonal regulation shifts. Recovery slows with age. At the time, he was in his early 30s and resilient. But the body keeps records. His childhood taught him observation. His training taught him excavation. His career demanded transformation. And beneath it all was a consistent pattern. Isolation as fuel. While peers socialized, he studied. While others networked, he rehearsed. Interviews from that era describe him as distant, private, almost clinically focused. Emotional accessibility was not part of his public persona. By the end of the 1970s, he had established himself as one of the most serious actors of his generation. But the foundation of that seriousness was built on early detachment, financial instability, and a constant need to prove physical credibility. At home, relationships were already showing strain. His first marriage to Diane Abbott began in 1976. They had a son. He adopted her daughter from a previous relationship. On the surface, it was stability. But De Niro's work habits were extreme. Long shoots, emotional withdrawal, intense preparation. The divorce came in 1988. No public screaming matches. Just legal dissolution. Divorce rates in Hollywood have historically exceeded national averages. Industry pressures, travel, ego, constant evaluation, erode consistency. De Niro was not immune. Through it all, he maintained a singular focus: work. The child who walked alone in Little Italy had become a man who functioned best in solitude. The difference was that now the solitude was chosen and paid for. This was the early reality of Robert De Niro. Not myth, not legend, just a thin boy in Manhattan who learned to survive by watching, absorbing, and transforming. The world would later see the power, but the roots of that power were planted in instability. The late 1970s and early 1980s marked the period when Robert De Niro stopped being a respected actor and became a standard. Directors adjusted scripts for him. Studios increased budgets around him. His name began to carry financial weight. But the ascent was not smooth. It was physical. It was obsessive. For Raging Bull in 1980, he agreed to play boxer Jake LaMotta. The role required two bodies, one lean and trained, the other bloated and deteriorating. He trained intensely for the fight sequences, sparring real boxers, reshaping his shoulders and torso. Then, for the later scenes, he gained roughly 60 pounds in a matter of months. Rapid weight gain of that scale alters cholesterol levels, blood pressure, and joint stress. The body adapts, but not without cost. He later described breathing becoming difficult. Movements slowed. His knees absorbed the extra mass. The performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. It also reinforced a pattern: total physical submission to a role. In the 1980s, he alternated between violent characters and controlled professionals. Mobsters, criminals, men operating under strict codes. Films like Once Upon a Time in America and The Untouchables deepened his association with organized crime figures. Audiences began to merge the actor with the roles. Typecasting is a statistical reality in Hollywood. Once an actor becomes financially linked to a specific archetype, studios repeat the formula. De Niro's face, voice, and stillness became synonymous with menace. Behind the scenes, his personal life grew more complex. His marriage to Diane Abbott ended in 1988. The divorce was finalized quietly, but custody and financial arrangements followed the standard high net worth pattern: asset division, support payments, legal teams. Divorce settlements among top-tier actors often reach 8 figures. While exact numbers remain private, the pattern of substantial financial redistribution is consistent across the industry. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, De Niro entered a relationship with model Tookie Smith. They had twin sons via surrogate in 1995. Surrogacy, particularly in the 1990s, was less publicly normalized. It required legal agreements, medical procedures, and discretion. Balancing fatherhood with a career built on long shoots and emotional immersion required compartmentalization. Interviews from that era show him speaking minimally about family. He maintained separation between public persona and private structure. In 1997, he married Grace Hightower, a former flight attendant. Within 2 years, the marriage fractured. In 1999, he filed for divorce while she was pregnant with their son. Court filings included custody disputes and public scrutiny. Eventually, they reconciled before the divorce was finalized. High-profile reconciliations often mask unresolved tension. Legal documents do not disappear simply because a couple withdraws proceedings. They remain as structural fractures. During this period, De Niro expanded beyond acting. In 1998, he co-founded the Tribeca Film Festival after the September 11th attacks in 2001 devastated Lower Manhattan. The goal was economic revitalization. The festival became a permanent institution. He also built the Nobu restaurant empire alongside chef Nobu Matsuhisa. The hospitality industry is volatile. Profit margins are narrow. Expansion requires debt, investors, and constant oversight. De Niro was no longer only an actor. He was a businessman responsible for payrolls, leases, and global partnerships. Entrepreneurship adds a different kind of pressure. Restaurants fail at high rates. Industry data often cites that approximately 60% close within the first year. Scaling internationally increases exposure to economic downturns. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Hospitality businesses worldwide shut down. Nobu locations closed temporarily. Revenue streams halted. Lawsuits emerged between De Niro and business partners over financial management and personal spending. Legal complaints alleged misuse of company funds for personal expenses. Counterclaims followed. Public legal disputes expose internal operations. Depositions reveal numbers, emails, habits. For a man who built his identity on privacy, Court filings forced transparency. Simultaneously, his film career shifted. By the 2000s, he leaned into self-parody in comedies like Meet the Parents. The intimidating mob figure became the overprotective father. The shift was financially successful but signaled a transition. Aging actors often pivot genres to maintain market relevance. Hollywood's age curve is documented. Leading male roles decline sharply after 60 unless attached to franchise structures or legacy directors. De Niro maintained output, but the roles grew less physically demanding. The physical residue of earlier transformations remained. Years of weight cycling, boxing training, and stunt work produce cumulative wear. Knee strain, back stiffness, and reduced flexibility are common among actors who performed intense physical roles without long-term athletic recovery protocols. In 2003, he underwent surgery for prostate cancer. The diagnosis was early stage. Treatment was successful. But cancer treatment, even when effective, leaves psychological markers. Mortality becomes less theoretical. Recovery requires monitoring, follow-up tests, and routine evaluation. Cancer survival rates for early detected prostate cancer are high, often exceeding 95% 5-year survival. But survival does not erase vulnerability. It introduces routine medical surveillance into daily life. Through the 2010s, De Niro remained prolific. Collaborations with Martin Scorsese continued, culminating in The Irishman in 2019. The film required digital de-aging technology. Cameras captured his movements. Then software altered his face to resemble a younger man. Technology can smooth skin on screen. It cannot adjust gait. Viewers noted moments where his body moved like an older man despite the digitally younger face. Aging is not only visible in wrinkles. It lives in joints, reaction time, posture. The Irishman required him to revisit the archetype that defined him. The aging mob enforcer confronting mortality. The narrative mirrored his own stage of life. Meanwhile, his marriage to Grace Hightower formally ended in 2018 after years of separation. Reports indicated that the divorce proceedings involved substantial financial negotiations. Public filings referenced high spending patterns and disputes over support. Divorce after decades of marriage often involves division of accumulated wealth, property, and long-term investments. In 2021, court testimony revealed that De Niro was still working extensively to maintain cash flow amid pandemic-related business losses and divorce obligations. Even at nearly 80 years old, he continued acting not solely for artistic expression but financial stability. The image of unlimited wealth attached to major actors often ignores liquidity realities. Net worth estimates include property, business equity, and investments, not cash in hand. When revenue streams slow and legal obligations continue, pressure remains. Then, in 2023, at age 79, he welcomed another child with his partner Tiffany Chen. Fatherhood at nearly 80 alters daily structure. Infant care requires interrupted sleep, lifting, bending, sustained attention. The human body at 80 does not recover from sleep deprivation the way it does at 30. Muscle mass naturally declines with age, a condition known as sarcopenia. Balance shifts. Reaction time slows. Caring for a newborn at that stage requires adaptation. The public often frames late-life fatherhood as vitality. Biologically, it is strain layered onto aging physiology. Across 5 decades, De Niro built a persona of control. But control required constant maintenance, physical transformation, financial negotiation, legal navigation, emotional compartmentalization. The fallout of greatness rarely arrives in a single collapse. It accumulates in courtrooms, medical offices, business ledgers, and quiet domestic tension. He became one of the most respected actors of his generation. He also became a man managing multiple divorces, complex custody arrangements, cancer recovery, global business exposure, and aging joints that once carried extra weight for applause. The cost was not theatrical. It was procedural. This was the career and the fallout. Robert De Niro is now 82 years old. At this stage of life, biology becomes less negotiable. Muscle mass declines at an estimated rate of 1 to 2% per year after the age of 50 unless aggressively countered with resistance training. Bone density thins. Cartilage that once absorbed impact during boxing scenes and staged fights does not regenerate. Recovery takes longer. Inflammation lingers. The man who once gained 60 pounds for a role now moves with calculated economy. His daily routine is structured. Reports from interviews and public appearances suggest he rises early. There are medical check-ins that have become routine since his prostate cancer diagnosis in 2003. Follow-up screenings. Blood panels. Monitoring is no longer optional at this age. It is maintenance. Aging in public is different from aging in private. Every step onto a red carpet is photographed. Every hesitation in speech becomes a headline. In recent appearances, his voice has grown softer, occasionally uneven. Age alters vocal cords. They thin and stiffen. Projection requires more effort. When he walks, there is a measured pace. No rush. No sudden turns. The body conserves energy. The knees that carried extra weight for Raging Bull and endured decades of stunt choreography now dictate limits. At 79, he became a father again. His daughter Gia was born in 2023 to Tiffany Chen. An infant in the house changes sleep cycles. Newborns wake every few hours. Even with assistance, presence is required. Holding a baby for extended periods strains shoulders and lower back, especially in someone over 80. Late-life fatherhood statistically increases generational distance. When a child is born to a parent in their late 70s, actuarial tables become unavoidable. In the United States, average male life expectancy is approximately 76 to 77 years. De Niro has already surpassed that benchmark. Each year is statistically narrower than the last. He has spoken publicly about the joy of the child. But joy coexists with arithmetic. There is also the reality of extended family complexity. He now has 7 children spanning decades in age difference. Adult children navigating their own careers. A toddler beginning life. Estate planning at this scale is intricate. Trusts, asset allocation, tax structures, guardianship considerations. These are not abstract concerns. They are scheduled meetings with attorneys. Financially, he remains active. Acting roles continue, though fewer in number and more selective. In recent years, he has worked with longtime collaborator Martin Scorsese again in Killers of the Flower Moon. The production required travel, location shoots, endurance. At 80, long days under lights are not neutral events. They demand stamina that must be carefully preserved. There are no public records detailing severe mobility impairment. He appears functional, engaged. But functionality at 82 means adaptation. Chairs are chosen deliberately. Stairs are navigated slowly. Rest periods are non-negotiable. The restaurant empire he helped build continues, but the pandemic's impact reshaped global hospitality economics. Inflation, supply chain strain, labor shortages. These factors require executive attention. Even if he is not managing daily operations, his name remains attached. Reputation risk never fully retires. Divorce proceedings with Grace Hightower concluded with financial arrangements that reportedly required significant support payments. Court testimony in 2021 revealed discussions about cash flow and continued work obligations. Even with substantial assets, liquidity matters when obligations are structured annually. There is a particular irony in his most iconic late-career role. In The Irishman, he portrayed Frank Sheeran, an aging hitman reflecting on a life of violence and isolation. The film ends in a nursing home corridor, doors partially closed, a man alone with memory. Art imitated the unavoidable direction of biology. He has lost peers. Harvey Keitel remains active, but many contemporaries have died. The generation that defined 1970s American cinema is thinning. Funerals become more frequent. Industry tributes become more personal. Psychologically, aging often introduces inventory. Regrets surface with sharper edges. Relationships are reviewed. Estranged connections become harder to repair as time compresses. In interviews, De Niro remains guarded. He does not romanticize aging. He speaks plainly. When asked about fatherhood at his age, he acknowledges the obvious. It is what it is. There is no dramatic confession. No public collapse. Instead, there is endurance. At 82, endurance looks different. It is not about gaining weight for a role or standing toe-to-toe with a co-star in a fight scene. It is about waking up without acute pain. It is about remembering lines without fatigue. It is about remaining cognitively sharp in an industry that replaces quickly. Cognitive decline is not guaranteed, but risk increases with age. Reaction time slows. Memory retrieval can require more concentration. Scripts that once could be absorbed rapidly may now demand repetition. He still attends premieres. He still steps before cameras. But the pauses between words are longer. The energy is contained. The boy called Bobby Milk survived Little Italy by observing. The young actor survived rejection by studying. The star survived Hollywood by controlling his body and image. The businessman survived economic collapse by restructuring. The cancer patient survived early detection and treatment. Now, the 82-year-old survives by adjusting to limits. Mortality is no longer theoretical. Friends pass away. Medical appointments are calendar anchors. A toddler grows in the same house where an aging father calculates time differently. There is no catastrophic fall from grace. The tragedy is quieter. It is the distance between the indestructible men he played and the fragile mathematics of the human body. It is the recognition that no performance, no award, no restaurant empire alters cellular aging. It is the knowledge that a child born when you are 7-9 may one day read about you rather than remember you clearly. Robert De Niro built a career on discipline and transformation. At 82, transformation continues, but now it is involuntary. The hands that once tightened into fists for the camera now steady themselves on armrests before standing. The voice that once filled interrogation rooms in film sets now lowers to speak to an infant. The public still sees the legend. The private reality is maintenance, planning, adaptation. He is not collapsing. He is enduring. And endurance, at 82, is its own form of exposure. This is the present status of Robert De Niro, a man who spent a lifetime portraying power, now negotiating the ordinary, irreversible mechanics of age, one measured step at a time.